I mentioned analytic thinking. What is it? It's important. It's what all of economics is. I contend that it's what all of all of your classes are or should be. Now, you may have heard this more described as critical thinking. Certainly that's the way it's been presented to me much of the time. I know that in some times in the past has been a learning objective that goes in syllabi, etc. It's critical thinking. Now, that oftentimes people see that as being negative about things, being very skeptical about things, and that's not really what I think we want to convey. I actually think a more helpful version or phrasing of it is analytic thinking. But what does that mean? Now, my experience with it, it was always this kind of thing that everybody knew we wanted to do, but nobody, if you tried to pin it down and you said, what is it? Summarize critical thinking for me. Most people struggled with it, and I certainly did. Of course, after I taught for a number of years, I decided I think it comes down to four questions. Four questions. Now, that's what we're going to be doing this term in this class, is asking four questions over and over again and getting insight by asking those four questions, gaining power about the world with those four questions. What are they? Now, in no particular order, we'll just put them down here and I'll abbreviate them. How do you know, or how do you know that? You see this all over the place. This is the idea behind the scientific method, where we run experiments and we collect data, but that's not the only way to answer the how do you know that. We can have a contextual analysis of various documents or various points of view. We can address theory, which we're going to be doing in here. We have life experience that has accreted in our lives to maybe address and answer the how do you know that question. Many of your classes probably, or certainly should, address this in some way. Now, it may be explicit, it may not always be explicit. Some classes very much are explicit. So when I taught an econometrics course, that's what it was. It was a semester asking the how do you know that question. And again, that oftentimes might involve some quantitative statistical techniques, but that's not the only way to do that. So how do you know that? Doesn't mean we think, if we ask that question, that we think you're wrong, or I ask that of myself all the time. How do I know that, right? Do I know that? Is this true, right? This is also another way of saying, right, what we're engaged in is some version of epistemology, the study of and search for truth. How do you know that is an important piece there? So that's one of them. First one, again, no particular order, but the first one I've written down. Next one, compared to what? And this is a very important one because the answer to this question will drive, well, what we compare things to will drive the answer much of the time. So as an example, how are you feeling today? Well, compared to what? Compared to an ideal world where, I had more money and I was more physically attractive and I had lots of friends and extra things and experiences, I'm not doing very well today. Oh, how about compared to, well, as an example, one of the things I certainly have carried with me, you'll hear me talk a fair bit throughout this. I have lived and traveled fairly extensively abroad. And, one of the places I lived was Togo in West Africa. Now, incomes or GDP per capita, something that we take up in a macroeconomics class, GDP per capita, rough measure of maybe per person income is around $300 to $400 a year. Sounds pretty bad, and it is pretty bad. Infant mortality is very high, life expectancy is short, the material quality of life is not great. Food variety isn't very good, etc. So my life now compared to my life in Togo, dramatically better. So that, again, is something that we want to address because depending on what we make a comparison with can drastically alter the answer. So compared to, how's my life compared to what it would be if I had made different decisions and maybe not made some of the mistakes that I've made, Compared to that, my life is terrible. However, compared to Togo, my life is wonderful. And this will come up throughout this class and is hopefully coming up in some of your other classes. Again, not all of these are going to be tackled explicitly in all classes. I think there's a lot of value in tackling them explicitly. Okay, what's the next one? This one, almost none of you will ever forget. It's one you're almost certainly already asking yourselves as you sit there and watch this video. Why do I care? Why do I care? And the answer might be you don't. Right? That's one thing I'll have to hopefully address here shortly is why should you care about this class? Beyond, obviously, one answer would be you need the credits, you need the grade for your GPA, maybe it's a prerequisite for other classes, maybe it's a requirement for your plan of study. So on that margin, you probably should care. But why beyond that? Now, that's not to say that, right, that you always will care. There are times when I ask myself, why do I care? And the answer is, I don't. So 3 or so years ago, my car broke down, and I said, that's upsetting. Now I have to go car shopping. And I said, well, wait, do I actually care about owning a car? And I thought about it, and I realized I didn't. I didn't care. So I don't have a car. I haven't had a car for 3 years. I have my motorcycle. I live close enough to the campus that I can walk. Yeah, turns out I don't care about owning a car. So sometimes the answer is you don't, which is informative, right? But this is important not just in the classroom, it's important all over the place. Again, sometimes the answer might be because there's this big thing you haven't seen. You think you don't care, and turns out there's this important dynamic. But this actually is really important to ask even when you think you do care deeply about something. Part of the question might be, why do I care about this thing? Why is, if you find something deeply upsetting to you, why is that? Why do I care so deeply about this? That can be also another way to use this question. And then finally, the question that almost everybody forgets, not just in classes, but in the policy space and in our lives and in bureaucracy and in corporations, is this one. What happens next? Because the world is a dynamic system. Pulling a thread over here will have an impact way over there oftentimes, particularly in the policy space. And this is also true in our personal lives, right? This was one of the things that when first time I dropped out of college, my parents said, well, what happens next? What are you doing? Well, this is great. I'm going to get a job. And yeah, but what happens after that? Now, it took me a while to figure that out. And for me, I did end up going back to college. But this what happens next question is important. You get to government policy, right? We're going to talk about some of these things, and we're going to develop some tools across the course of this term to address these things. But yeah, so those there are what I think, and my hope is that if you go and look at pretty much all your classes, my hope is that you're going to discover that your professors are going to be challenging you on these. That's really what their classes are, and what intellectual pursuit is. It's what learning is. It really boils down to asking those 4 questions consistently and correctly to gain greater insight. So that's analytic thinking in a nutshell. We'll come back and I will talk about see if we can apply this, right? In a way that might answer your why do I care question.